Hello and welcome to this episode of the podcast. This is a podcast where we talk about challenges that business owners and entrepreneurs have had to push through. Today's guest is Matthew Kelly, who is the Managing Director of social agency Just Media Design. Now, Matt is full of energy. This was an amazing interview to do. I really enjoyed it, and he really carried it. I actually had a cold when we were recording this, so you'll have to excuse a bit of coughing here and there from me, but for the most part, I was able to edit it out. Let's have a little sneak peek of one of Matt's stories before we get into it. Tell us about, I understand you hired a big creative director. Can you, and that had an interesting ending, I believe. Can you tell us about that?
It did. We went through a scenario, it was second half of last year, where we heard word that a creative director from probably the most well-known social agency in the world was returning to Australia to live. Right. And she'd worked for... If you had to name the one biggest magazine in the world, you would say this company name.
Right.
If you had to name the biggest social agency in the world, you would say this name. It's like She was based in New York, had the most ridiculous experience over a number of years, was returning to Brisbane, and just by chance, I think just because we were sort of just hitting our stride at the time, we became an appealing place for her to come and join to really drive change, right?
Yep.
She'd come from the best as a creative director, and it was like, well, where do I go now? And we had this amazing situation where, equity was committed to, really digging into the pockets to find a way to make it work.
Oh, really?
And
Okay.
And actually looking at extra investment to bring her in to that degree, because I'm going like, wow, this is someone who not only understands agency, but understands social.
Yep.
To me, that was unheard of.
Okay.
Especially in Australia, anywhere in Australia, let alone the world. So, but just through a sequence of really interesting events, joined us in late last year, and I guess the learning there for me was experience is important, but attitude is more important. And don't get me wrong, she's got a great attitude, but to me, the best in the world are not necessarily using data in the way that I use data.
Oh, right. Okay.
Particularly when they're led from the creative perspective. So this was a learning where this person came in. I gave her a huge, at this time the business was still very much my baby, right? I was incredibly involved, doing the long hours, doing all that. Like, okay, I full trust, full respect. I love what you've done. I wish I had your experience. Like, come in and do what you want to do. And so she actually hired a few people into the company, and they've all performed well. And that was a great experience. But what I learned was almost. When you see a not just a lack of understanding, but a disrespect for the numbers, you go, right, this has been led from the agencies that you've experienced life in, having roots into traditional marketing. So, still reporting on number of impressions, still reporting on, this is the best piece of creative because this is what we believe is the best piece of creative. And after a couple of months, I went, wow, if this is the best, then I'm super excited about the direction we're going in. And I don't believe that we're the best by any means, but one of those moments where you go, I'm going to let someone go who's got 10 times more experience than me in the biggest companies in the world. All signs point to them being a god in my world, and I'm going to let them go. Yeah. And this could be a bad idea. In fact, it's almost guaranteed to be a bad idea.
Hello and welcome to the Be The Push podcast. My name is Jack Ferguson, and I'm going to be sharing with you stories of how business owners and entrepreneurs had to push through the hard times in their careers. We're going to be discussing the lessons learned from these experiences while arming you with actionable advice so you can be the push when you need it most. Show notes can be found at bethepush.com/podcast and clicking on the relevant episode link. Let's get started. We have that story and many more coming up in this episode. It was interesting to hear that Matt hired a seemingly amazing employee that just didn't quite fit with their company or fit with their culture. So someone who looked fantastic on paper, and it just didn't quite work out when they were internal. So you'll get to hear more about that in the episode. What else? We talk about the difficulties of building a company when you're not a salesman. Now, I know I'm not a salesman, and I know how tough it can be, especially when you hate cold calling and you hate that cold contact. You want to meet people that respect you, and Matt's similar. He's a very outgoing guy, but doesn't really like the cold outreach. So Matt talks about how he goes about doing that, how he started building up a client base, even though he hates selling. So that's in there as well, amongst a few other things. We talk about iterative marketing and how important it is to test your assumptions these days and to not just blindly send out creative into the world and hope for the best. But I don't really need to sell this episode anymore because you're going to have a great time listening to it. Matt was so fantastic to talk to. So I hope you enjoy. It's a long one, but it's a good one. All right, so we have Matthew Kelly here with us today. Matt, how are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks, Jack.
All right, so let's start off by you're the managing director of Just Media Design, which is a social-first digital agency. Actually, you're just a new dad as well, so congratulations.
Thanks so much. Yeah, it's been a very interesting 2 weeks.
All right. So let's start off with getting a bit of context around your career to date, just so the listeners know where you started, where your career started, and where you're at now.
Yeah, sure. So I'm 29 years old. When I think back to sort of school and the early sort of when you're starting to work out what you want to do when you grow up, was blessed with an opportunity to go and do an internship in the radio industry, actually. So I was always into creative things, but going into radio was one where I was like, whoa, man, like marketing promotions is a thing and it's interesting and it's creative and there's no rules, right? There's a lot of stuff that you can do. And in radio, it was one that I just found fascinating that was an industry. It's like, right, so these guys are here talking and that's valuable. Like this is fascinating to me. So sort of having gone through school and did a couple of, basically it was just like unpaid internships during the school holidays,
right,
which was cool.
Did you do any good in school?
No, I didn't do well at school.
Oh, right.
I was a pretty mediocre student.
Okay.
I like things like film and TV. I did really well.
Yep.
Math, science, English, average, super average. Very average student. Didn't managed to get into a, and I guess that funnels really nicely into just a business degree at Griffith Uni, and I probably just scraped in.
Oh, so right, okay.
Not a UQ or QUT guy, although I'd always wanted to be that.
Right.
Just managed to just get in, and at uni, again, business degrees, majors in marketing and management. It's one of those things where you get in there and you're like, this is cool, I'm going to do this, and then I'm going to be an expert, and then I'm going to have an awesome job, and all that creative stuff I want to do is all going to happen. So, after, going to uni and then getting sort of a job on the side where I was doing sort of marketing stuff, sort of not really, you realize pretty quickly that it's like, okay, so what side projects am I gonna start? Because the uni degree is pretty boring, right, and there's not much sort of real world in there. So especially you're looking about 2005, I started uni, so it's pretty it was very early technology, right? Yep. It was very still very traditional thinking, and I think it's probably still fairly traditional today, which is not ideal,
right?
But
You mentioned, though, that you're saying that you were looking for things to do on the side. I wouldn't, from my experience with uni, I don't think that's a common mindset among the students. Would that be fair to say? Yeah,
I mean, I listened to a lot of podcasts even then, and that was quite early in the podcast days. I was super into technology, so I was following people like Leo Laporte or Kevin Rose, people who even back then were doing big, interesting things in the tech industry. Yep. And I guess what that showed me was that anyone can do that. These guys were all experts. They'd been on TV. They'd done all the big stuff that you need to do to create those opportunities. But for me, that was an opportunity that just, I don't know, made sense.
Okay.
So, I didn't do anything particularly interesting. It was actually when I first discovered sort of the notion of outsourcing and platforms like Elance, because I was able to go wow, I'm not technical. I can't build, but I know what I want to build. And this is a way for me to literally save up pocket money and then engage someone and have them help me to build. So I think that's when I first sort of discovered that there was no rules, really. Yeah. There was it was you can basically do whatever you want. Knew I had to do the uni degree because A, that was what my parents wanted to see me do, and B, it was you're going to get a job one day, you need it, which is fair. Yeah. I went through that process, and at the end of it, sort of came out of uni, no job at the time, and went, what do I do now? And managed to stumble into just a very basic grad position in digital marketing. And at a big insurance company based here in Brisbane, and I sort of went into that role and had the big dreams, right? The big vision. I was going to go in there, and they were hiring me because I was an expert and understood digital, and I've been following it for all these years, and I loved the notion of the tech industry and startups and Silicon Valley, and they'd be super excited about my energy. And after probably 6 weeks to 3 months, I worked out that I had no influence whatsoever. No one cared about what I thought. my role was to write a business case when someone thought up a new use for Twitter for selling insurance policies.
Okay.
And obviously nothing ever went live, right?
Okay,
Which is big corporate in general.
Yep.
So I went through that process of, after it was probably 3 months realistically where I worked out I had no influence whatsoever. And that's when the side projects really kicked in. Because I was like, right, well, this is like the real world, and it's still boring, and it still sucks, and I still can't do anything. And that's when I did things like start a podcast and write a book and all the things that I was like just enjoyed doing on the side that ultimately equated to me like unlocking more opportunity.
Gotcha.
So like the podcast that I hosted with a good friend of mine, which was fairly early for podcasting in Brisbane, certainly, well, probably in Australia actually, it was fairly early. We did really well, and I just attribute that to dumb luck at the time, right? It was like I would say 2 idiots just yelling at each other on Skype, recorded the conversation, no edits, went live, and that was it. It was just us talking about the things we were passionate about, and a lot of it was tech and business and the things that I enjoyed.
Yep.
And that's basically what unlocked an opportunity for me to go and work for the Monkey Inferno, which is a tech, essentially a personal incubator in San Francisco.
Okay.
So that was for me that was the win, because that was literally working for a company owned by a guy with what's just under $1 billion US. He'd sold the social network Bebo at the time.
Oh wow!
And
I remember Bebo.
Yeah. And so he sold that. He had money, and he basically worked out that sitting on a yacht is boring.
Yeah.
I want to keep building stuff, so I'm going to hire roughly 20 to 22 people, I think, when I was there, and it's going to be primarily developers, but also have a product team made up of a couple of designers, a couple of product people. I was a marketer. And the objective was just build stuff that we're passionate about. It's not to make more money. We don't need money.
Right.
It's like, what can we do that's interesting or different?
Right.
And having really... I mean, budget was never the issue. So then it's like, so if budget's not the issue, then it was like, well, creativity is the issue.
Yeah.
And here I am. Well, like I look back now, I'm like, man, I don't know why I was trusted in that position. It was just because I'd gone and started a podcast, really.
Right.
So
that's how he found you, through that?
So he was sort of almost working in an advisory position. He was in there a couple of days a week, but certainly not running it day to day.
Okay.
So he'd hired a guy called Sean Puri, who actually did some work in Brisbane. He's an American.
Okay.
He went over there and essentially stepped into a CEO role for the day to day. And Sean knew me and then knew the podcast.
Gotcha.
So I think that was the social proof or the credibility that I needed for him to go, actually, this is like, I'd sponsor a visa for that.
Yeah.
And that was, it was, 3 months of Skype calls and chats and what does it look like and how does it work and what would I be doing and how does that all play out? And when I got there, it was just the most mind-blowing experience of my life.
Wow. Okay.
It was, for me, it was, 10 years in the 2 that I'd had in Brisbane prior. It was it was like game changing for me.
Okay.
Just in terms of understanding that if money's not your challenge, then like you got to get really, really good at like applying your knowledge or applying the thought process, because you can't ever go, it didn't work because we didn't have budget, which is what every excuse is in this market, right? It's like, I wish we could have done more, but...
budget,
It's like, but they didn't have enough money, so we couldn't. It's like, okay, well, if that wasn't an issue, then what would your excuse be?
Yeah.
And your excuse is almost always like, I didn't succeed or I failed.
Yeah.
So that was fun. It was scary. It was like, I was always the dumbest guy in the room, but it was so much fun.
Wow. So how do you keep your position in a company like that? Because you're not like... I'm trying to imagine what the KPIs would look like.
Yeah, there were no formal KPIs.
Oh, okay.
It was like in that environment where, again, like money isn't the objective. Yeah. It's like them tracking your success is super difficult. It's like, well, did we acquire this many new Twitter followers, or like how do you attribute an ROI to my time? And like in that market, it's all comes down to like, how do you perform with the team? How much, like, really, I think if the team respected me, and then I probably would have been successful, because they're all there for the same reason. They all want to do big things too. So no one's in a company like that, in a role like that, just because they want to cruise.
Right.
If you just want to cruise, then there's a million jobs you can do where you're not accountable to anyone else. But everyone's there at 11 at night because they care.
Yeah, gotcha.
And it wasn't because there was a boss whipping them. It was because that was a cool opportunity, or that was something that they actually enjoyed doing.
Yeah.
So that was a very unique experience.
That sounds incredible. Yeah.
A lot of imposter syndrome there too. So a lot of like my hardest thing was not anyone else questioning me questioning myself.
Yeah, gotcha.
Because it was like this is a bad call. I don't think it's a good call. What's a better call? I don't know. Okay, well then make that call. And that's a lot of that was like, everyone else here has worked at Google or Facebook or Apple or whatever, and I've worked at a little insurance company in Brisbane. Like, it was just a very, very different pathway to get there.
Yep.
Which is interesting.
Yep.
So after, sorry, this is a very long-winded story, but
cool. Keep going.
after I was there for a couple of years and got to the point where my wife and I were talking about kids, and really 2 years over there it got to a point where I was like, okay, I think I'm ready to go,
Right.
move on, or go and take on another challenge, and do it for myself this time. So I returned to Brisbane with this view to go and well, it was really to start a social agency. I knew I wanted to work in social. I'd worked with, while I was in America, we reacquired Bebo. So AOL, who bought it, drove it into the ground.
Right.
We actually bought it back in an auction for $1 million.
Wow.
So in that situation, I was sitting there like, right, so now we're juggling databases of tens of millions of people, in some cases up to or very close to 100 million people.
Wow.
So, you see the inner workings of the social network, you're working with the team who built it originally.
Yep.
It's very, very different learning to what you get in any other setting, right? I remember for one of the sites we were working on, it had a user base of roughly 40 million people, and which sounds ridiculous in this market. It's like over there it was good, but it wasn't crazy. Okay. And I remember for Father's Day, I wanted to send out an EDM to the user base.
Yep.
And they just said to me, well, how are we going to, how do you want to send it out? To how many people? And I was like, to all of them. Yeah. And they just sort of looked at me like, you want to send an email to 40 million people? Think about what that, how do you think that works? And I'm just sitting there like, I don't know, MailChimp? I don't know, how do you do that? I've never had to worry about that before. We used Vision 6 when I was in Brisbane. Surely there's a tool. They're like, yeah, no, everything's custom at this point. I was like, right, okay. I mean, there's tools, but there's sort of enterprise level stuff. But that was a very, very different perspective. And having been through that for a couple of years, it was like, I think I can do it in Brisbane. If I've lasted this long, if I lasted more than 3 months in San Francisco, then I'm pretty comfortable returning to Brisbane.
Right.
So came back, started up the agency with a bit of financial support from Jason Ralston and Kieran O'Donnell, who started Just Digital People. Right. And they sort of invested in me and the business just to get us off the ground. And then it was the beginning of probably the hardest thing I've done. Right. Up until that point in time.
Gotcha.
So, yeah.
Wow. So you're telling me that you can't, with 40 million people, you can't just go into MailChimp and just write up an email and then press send campaign?
You spend a lot of money. I think you probably can. I don't know how that would work. Okay. I don't know whether you need a lot of MailChimp accounts. I don't know. Yeah. I have no idea how that would work.
Right.
I remember at the time just trying to learn how these basically consumer tools or prosumer tools, how do they work when you've got a database that big? Yeah. Because you can certainly use them with thousands, hundreds of thousands of users, but you get to a point where it's more effective to build your own software. Yeah. And
makes sense.
Yeah, it's not something that I ever thought I would tackle in my lifetime.
Right.
I hadn't planned on building a social network, and certainly not with a user base that size. So not something I'd ever had to think about.
Cool.
Interesting.
Yeah. All right. So now you come back to Brisbane, you start Just Media Design. It was about 3 years ago now, is that right?
Yeah, almost 3 years. Almost 3 years in February, yeah.
And I seem to remember maybe around that time, my feeling in the market is a lot of people still weren't sold on social as a business tool. I'm not sure if you still feel that's somewhat the case. What was it like convincing people that they needed to actually use social in their business?
That's a great question. For the first probably 3 months, we didn't make $1. It was like, okay, what do we do now? It was almost like I don't even know what we're selling. I knew social well. I'd run a lot of campaigns in the US. I wasn't worried about the ability for me, and then also it was literally me and one other person at the time. I wasn't worried about our ability to do stuff. I knew that we could do stuff, granted the opportunity to, right? If someone was like, okay, I need to run a customer acquisition strategy, it'd be like, okay, well, let's think, at least I knew the steps required to think through what that might look like. That never scared me. What was hard was now who do I talk to? Okay, I've got the website live. I wonder what I should do now. Yeah. And a bit of that is that I'm not a sales guy. I'm certainly going to pick up the phone and call someone I don't know, because that's scary as hell.
Amen to that.
So, and I'm still a bit like that now, actually. Although I've got much less hesitant. But even now, it's like if I've got to pick up and call cold call, then it's probably not. I'm probably not nurturing effectively, right? So, so then it was like, okay, well, I've got to use my existing relationships. I've got a few, especially in this Brisbane market, and a lot of them are curious about what I in America. So,
Gotcha.
so the stories became the gateway to discussions.
Right.
But even then, it's very easy to go and have a coffee meeting with someone that you already know and talk about stuff that you did previously.
Yeah.
To turn that into a discussion around, so here's what I'm thinking we could do with you and the company you work for, or your company. It's like, that's a very hard sell for someone that doesn't want to sell.
Gotcha.
And I didn't want to sell at all, to be honest. I wanted people to come to me and go, hey, I need what you do.
Yep.
If I had to convince them, then it felt bad. And that was something that it took me a while to sort of get over that, basically.
Right.
It's like, I'm going to run out of money. And when I run out of money, I can't be here. And then I'm going to go get a job. And I don't really want to do that.
Yep.
So what does it look like? And I think, after probably a couple of months of that, you start to have conversations where you get a bit more pointed. So you're like, oh, and I noticed that you guys are doing this. And when I was in America, we did something similar. It looked like, these 3 variables applied to, some sort of very simple sort of methodology or thinking that you'd sort of draw for them. And you'd go, so if you did that, I think you'd be successful. And then the next conversation would be, well, can you show us how to do that? It's like, great, let's have a conversation. We did a lot of things around what we were calling off-brand communities. So it was like, well, I don't want to go and pitch someone, but what if we had already built a lot of communities that didn't have a brand aligned, but showed our ability? So, if I have a fitness community that's, and it might be like me as a PT, right? And I'm not a PT at all, but me as a PT, like posting content about fitness and food and all the stuff that PTs would post about.
Yep.
Like, can I get 30,000 people on a Facebook page? Because back then that was perceived as value.
Right.
And if I did that and then talked about it, you get questions.
Gotcha. Yep.
So we unlocked Super Retail Group doing that, like literally with that strategy. And I didn't build it for them, but I had an Instagram account that had grown quite rapidly. They were not doing, the particular company owned by Super Retail Group at the time was not doing anything on Instagram.
Okay.
And I just in conversation with some guys that I didn't previously know, just showed them it. And the next conversation was, could you do that for us? And then 10 minutes later, it was, we'll start next month. And
cool.
And I think that's like through doing, it created more tangible opportunity rather than through pitching.
Gotcha. All right. So are you still not a salesman, or?
I don't think of myself as a sales guy, but I know that I've gotten to a point where in most conversations, I'm able to at least get the decision maker to a point where I go, and to be honest, I'm probably like a hesitant sales guy. So I'm more likely to tell you why we're not going to work together than why we are.
Gotcha.
And what I've found many times is that people will then try to convince you about why you should.
Wow.
So, and referrals does that, reputation does that, it all helps. We mostly work with bigger brands now. So for me, it's much less about new customer acquisition and more about, although that's always a priority, and more about retaining. And when you retain, then you get referred. So that's really how we've grown. Only early this year did we effectively onboard our first sort of full-time sales focused person, and Ben came in with the objective of, can we take what's going on in the brains of the existing team and push that to the people that actually matter? And that's only been in the last year. So really, we ran 2 years with just me doing stuff.
Right. So what would you say? There's a lot of people who want to start a business and I'm one of them. I was when I started, hated selling. I still hate selling.
Yeah.
I really like that idea of people want to come to me because they want to work with me because I'm the right fit or whatever. Right. Just picking up the phone and saying, hey, do you want to have a chat about this?
No one wants to talk.
I know. And I don't like hearing that. Don't call me and tell me about your thing that I don't want to buy. I just don't want to hear it. What would you say to someone in that position? They're just about to start a business and they really don't want to do the cold thing. Well, is events, was that part of your strategy in the beginning?
Oh, a little bit, but I'm not good in a networking setting. I'm not good at, I actually hate, I'm the guy that if I'm standing in a line somewhere, I'll be looking at my phone. I won't be talking to the person next to me. There's no way. In fact, I'll do things to avoid those conversations. Yeah. If I'm with someone who is like that, I'll walk a meter away from them because it's just, I'm not comfortable in that setting.
Right.
For me, if I was talking to someone right now who wanted to start and didn't know how the customer acquisition strategy was going to play out, I think it's actually, a lot of people are writing blog articles on LinkedIn, things like that, right? To try and drive attention. I don't know if that really works.
Okay.
Particularly if you don't have a big, active, engaged audience. For me, it's who do you know right now? Because if people, and even if just say you're a uni student, your parents probably still work. If your parents work, then who are they connected with, and who can you talk to, and who's your uncle works in some big company somewhere. What's his perspective on what you want to do? Because having those conversations is way more valuable. Like it gets you much closer to that's what you're offering is actually valuable.
Right.
As opposed to like, I'm just going to like post about it and run a Facebook ad and see what happens, right? It's like super hard to succeed that way. So for me, it was all existing relationships in the early days,
right,
which is really then turned into referral.
Gotcha.
In fact, it's and we don't ask for referrals. We probably should more. We've never, only in the last 3 months we've thought about things like testimonials.
Yep.
It's always been like, oh, and by the way, talking to a client, it's like, oh, by the way, my friend is the head of marketing at this company. I know they were struggling with their existing agency. What can we do there? Or can you help them? I'm like, yeah, sure, I'll go to a meeting. And then the context is already built. You're walking in there as I'm not the pre-show. I'm like, you're going in there as the celebrity, right? You're going in there as the act. And they already know who you are. And they know that you've done good work.
And so you don't feel like you got something to prove, right? I'm here to convince you. No, we're just going to chat. And if it works out, it does. If not, who cares? My
favorite strategy there has been like in situations where I'm unsure, because the most important thing to me is like I need to want to work with people, and everyone says that. For me, it's fairly real. It's like I wouldn't work with someone that I didn't actually want to hang out with, or at least have ongoing conversations, because I'm only doing that for work.
Yep.
And I didn't start my own company to have a boss that I hated.
Yeah.
So with that mindset, then it's like, well, that first meeting is about me validating that person as much as it is them validating me.
Yeah.
And it's easy to say after you've done it, but I think it's important to think like that from the beginning, because we've had a few relationships with clients that haven't been not bad, but I've like when you see their name on your phone, you're not excited to answer.
Gotcha. Yep.
And that's something that I'm fairly proud to say now that if any one of our clients called me at virtually any time, I'd be pretty happy answering that phone call.
Gotcha.
And
okay.
And that's something that took sort of thought and like it's like, well, how do you build that? Well, now we've got the no douchebag policy, and it's like, and that's for internal, it's for external as well. So it's, if you're a client, if you're a prospective client, then I'm going to test you on that.
Yeah.
You're not going to know I'm testing you, but I'm going to test you on it. And if it doesn't feel right, it doesn't feel right. And the best thing about that is, like, I say that in meetings now. It's like, to be honest, I've just got to work out if I want to work with you. And I met with a guy, it's a fairly small business. They weren't an ideal client for us. And in the meeting, he sort of said to me, like him recognizing that I didn't want to sell, he sort of said, I'm curious. I want to know, like, how would the pricing work? And I was like, oh, we're nowhere near pricing yet. I have no idea how the pricing would work. Yep. Like, what I want to know is, like, is this even the right fit? Like, can we work with you? Do we actually believe we can get a result for you? Because if I don't think any of those, then the pricing doesn't matter, because we're not going to work together. Yep. And people struggle with that. People really struggle with that.
It's one of my policies as well, actually, is that if you early on, if a potential client goes, oh, so what's your rates? And like, if they're really into the price before we even work out whether I can do anything for you, I've got to run.
Yeah.
Fast.
It's like, what are your packages? It's like, I don't have packages, and I'm not going to give them to you right now. It doesn't matter. It's a waste of both of our time talking about pricing, because right now I may well not even be able to help you. So it's like, what's the point, right?
And I think in those situations, I sometimes get the impression that type of person doesn't really know what they want either. They're just, the price question's just something they throw out.
And if it's a number that sounds low-ish to them, then they're curious. Yeah. And if it sounds high, then they've discarded whatever you've said. And it's like, well, if I could have made you $1 million. If I'm quoting you 250, like, you might pay that, right? Like, it's like, that might be viable, or it might not. But like, if we have that conversation up front, it doesn't really get us anywhere. Yeah. It's like, I don't even know if I can't generate that revenue, then you paying me 250 is a massive waste of your money. Yeah. So it's interesting. Yeah, we push price to as far back as we can, because in most cases it doesn't matter. The only time we will use it is if we're trying to work out whether they could actually pay us what they would need to. So often, if it's a small to medium size, then the price discussion will come early, because I need to know fairly quickly, like, if we were to do something, are you in the ballpark of spending $1,000 a month or $20,000 a month? Because if it's $1,000 a month, we're going to be like scraping to find something that'll work. Yeah, it's very difficult for us to do something sustainably in that space. So that's a challenge, but in most cases, especially when you're talking bigger corporates, the money thing comes later. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So let's talk about some of the other challenges you had during the career you've had with Just Media Design. Have you got something else for us? Like, I think about early in the early days, it's like you sort of go through that process of like, okay, well, how do we commercialize this? And if you only grow through referral and existing relationships, that's hard. I think there's been scenarios where we've won contracts and then lost contracts.
Okay.
I'm proud to say that we win a lot more than we lose, and
Yep.
and we've actually let a couple of clients go that haven't been right for us, which has been both the hardest thing to do, and then always looking back and being like, that was the best thing we could have done, because by eradicating that from our schedule, we're now doing something much better. So that's always been hard. I think. The other thing is around, I guess, around sort of the competitive standpoint. So when we first started, a lot of that, you mentioned it earlier, a lot of the people just going like, it's very hard to commercialize this. It's very hard to make this work. Like, no one sold social in the Brisbane market.
Right.
I mean, people had, but it was often freelance or very, very small, or it was existing web agency, existing PR agency. It was led through, social was a tack on because people started to spend money on Facebook ads, and we had to do something. We just built their website. That was a way for us to, to add to the hosting with ongoing revenue.
Yep.
Like, let's offer them a Facebook package, or we'll post a few times a week, and that'll work. And that was happening. I remember talking to a long-standing sort of industry contact who's super senior in the big agency world, and I remember him saying to me, like, you can't sell social. You can't deliver on social. You can't sell social. What you should be focusing your time on is training people on how they should be using social, because big companies should be doing it themselves. They shouldn't be outsourcing it.
Right.
And that was one of those discussions where, I'm a big advocate for lean and iterative thinking. It's like, I'm 3 months in, like I've started the company, I'm talking to people. It's like, you can't tell me now, like, you're validating that my hypothesis is wrong. Yeah. I can't know, like that doesn't work. And he was being honest from his perspective. But that's because in the big agency world, they're still nowhere near really capitalizing on this market.
Wow.
So in his head, what he said was true. What we learned was you can't build a traditional agency and then expect it to work well in social.
Gotcha. Okay.
And I think it's the same for PR. I think, in fact, I know it's the same for PR. I think it's the same for probably web dev as well.
Yep.
The way that you execute on all of those other projects doesn't work with marketing, or at least it doesn't work with the speed and the that sort of iterative execution that you need to be focused on. And I think that's something that took me. I've known that since the beginning, in terms of the idea of an evolving campaign or an iterative campaign. It's like no one knows what's going to work before you start. So test 10 variables, and the 3 that perform best. Now you've got that much closer. Pause it on performers, invest more into the high performing, and add new hypotheses as you go. And keep sitting in that sort of feedback loop, or that test, measure, learn model, which is, I'll just strip that straight from lean startup. But in the marketing world, particularly digital, that works beautifully well.
Right, yeah.
So it's like, well, let's apply that thinking. And through doing that, that's what's been the gateway to all of our success. And all the clients we've retained because of that. And they now understand that, which is great. Other agencies, especially sort of back then, our competitive agencies, that was a dumb idea. That was terrible. It's like they're engaging you because you're an expert. In their head, it's like, when you go into a meeting with a client and they're asking for the big idea, it's like, well, what's the big idea? I'm like, I'll say to the client, like, I've got no freaking clue. I know you don't have a clue either. So we have to test a bunch of things and work it out together. Because I can make something up, which is really like my best guess. But it's not what I do, and my success rates would be pretty low if I did that all the time.
Right.
So going on that sort of that test process is one that has been a massive differentiator, and one that it was quite difficult for us to work out how to do that in the early days. How to go in there and tell a client that, no, the way that you're doing right now is actually broken, or the way your existing agency is doing it is broken. Here is examples of the right way to do it. And it took to working out how you did, like, basically it's like, how do I tell that story in a way that's honest and real and transparent, but also fairly delicate, because you're talking to a senior marketing leader who's probably been in that role for a long time. If I am talking to that person, then I'm talking to the right person. But it's like, now I've got to tell them they don't understand marketing. Like and I'm like, in like mid 20s. I've done some stuff, but nothing like what they've probably done over their 20, 30 year career. Now I'm telling them they don't understand. And that's a hurdle that you got to jump over.
Right. What about the it must take a bit of balls to say, I'm assuming in the beginning, to be able to say to someone, I don't know. Like, I don't have the solution. The idea is we're going to work it out, as we go, and while you're paying me to do it,
Oh, I love it. I love it. It's actually, like, I've enjoyed that from the beginning, and I think I enjoyed it because it was a pattern interrupt. It was me, like, going in there where they're used to being pitched something, me saying, I don't know what I'm going to pitch. I have no idea what I'm going to pitch. And them going, what? Okay, so like, instead of me pitching an idea or a campaign, why don't we pitch like a framework that will commit to working for 3 months? And this is what the framework looks like. And we've got a really nice sort of visual articulation of that sort of that adaptation of the lean startup. We call it an iterative learning cycle, just because everything's got a name now. And that was one where we said, like, this is what it looks like. And it starts with sort of develop strategy and develop your hypothesis, and then basically moves into this this feedback loop where you go, all right, design some creative, go live, measure result. And from there, from measure result, you then go back into hypothesis. So it's not like, nothing exists forever. The idea is that the campaign starts today and will go indefinitely. There's no 1 month campaign. This goes indefinitely. But after 48 hours, we're sure as hell going to pause the non-performers. And provided we've reached enough people, that's what we do. And that's something that, it took time. It took time. The more clients that I had, the easier it became. Partly because I probably cared a little bit less about their feelings or their thoughts, and more about, like, well, to be honest, like, in the early days, do anything to win a client. Like, the minute you're busy, it's like, I don't want to have those meetings, and then they want it more because you're saying no, and then it's like, okay, I'll go to the meeting, but then it's like the feelings matter least. Then in that situation, it's like, all right, if we're going to do it, here's the conditions that it would have to apply to, because if we don't do it that way, you're going to stop working with us anyway, because you're not going to get a result. So that's fun. To me, that's the most fun part now, is those meetings, because the shock factor that you pull out of some of the people's faces is fun. Is really fun.
It's incredible. So do you reckon before, we've got social now and digital, where we can, you can make something live in 5 minutes really. Before that, with the traditional type of marketing, in the long lead times and whatnot, were people back then pretending they knew this was going to work? Because how the hell would you have known? Like, if you're going to do a billboard campaign that's got a 6-week, lead cycle,
and then it's going to be up there for 3 months.
How before doing this stuff, how would someone have actually known?
Well, the real challenge is, how did they measure the result? Because it's like, because they didn't know, and then they also didn't know whether it worked or not. So it's like, take your best guess. And some people will say, we did the focus groups, we did the workshops, we did the whatever. We know how much foot traffic goes past. It's like, there's a lot of that stuff. I call BS on most of that. In 2016, I call BS on most of that. I don't think that you can... Well, I think you're doing your client an injustice if that's the way that you're pitching for work in this day and age. Because when I look at the market today, it's like, we actually ran a company for a big RTO about 12 months ago where they were doing a huge, and this is all channel marketing campaign in the Western Sydney region, and they had to roll it to this area for a whole range of reasons, and they were going to spend up to $1 million in just stuff with billboards and buses and everything. And I remember them calling me in because they wanted us to assist in the digital component. And the conversation I had with them was, they were like, well, what message do we, big brainstorming session, what message do we put on the buses, and how does that translate on the bus stops? And then these billboards should be different to these ones because they're in different areas. And I'm just sitting there like, so you're telling me that you're just going to make this up? Literally, and this is agency and it's the team. It's like the agencies come in with this big, really nice sort of visual doc around why it should be this message. But I'm sitting there like, whoa, how could you make that decision? You're going to spend like up to $1 million on a campaign that is just gut feel. It's all gut feel. And the hardest part is they wouldn't know what was successful anyway. So what I managed to...
A lot of people saw it, Matt.
Well, sure. Yeah, I guess. I get impressions worth something. I don't know. And no, there's a lot to be said for that, right? That industry is not dead. I'll be the first to admit that. I will be the biggest advocate in the world for multi-channel, because in a world of lead nurturing, that reassurance is worth everything. But I look at those as now supporting activities rather than primary activities.
Right, okay.
So if I can drive, a hard call to action in front of someone's face, then I'll be looking to the TV campaign to support that. Because I know that I can't convert them with a TV ad, but I can probably get them along that pathway.
Gotcha,
In that Western Sydney campaign, we just said, all right, well, we know we're going to go live in a couple of months. What if in the next 6 weeks I just ran a social campaign? We just test all the messages that you're brainstorming right now. And in that time, we knew exactly, well, not exactly, but we had a very, very good idea of what wasn't going to work or what wasn't engaging. And literally just measuring based on engagement or click, and by engagement, what I mean is, we reached this many people, this percentage that clicked. And if we just look at ad click on rate or ad click through rate, then it's a pretty simple discussion to go, this is working, that's not working. There might be 3 things working and 3 things not working, but that's a much of a stronger position than if we just went live with a bunch of stuff. I've proud to say that the sort of learnings from that did go through to their traditional campaign. I still don't know if it worked or not.
Right.
But it was, to me, it was looking back and going, okay, well, at least we're putting some data behind that decision.
Yeah.
We're not just doing a focus group of 12 people.
Yeah.
Because it's what they would have done, and I don't think that works.
Yeah. And a focus group it still doesn't really measure behavior, does it? Really? I mean, a click is an actual reaction to something. As a focus group, I'm like, oh yeah, Matt looks great. You're I really like that billboard you put up, you know.
Oh,
like
you can't do it. Like if you're sitting around a table with 12 people and someone goes, I think this, the next person goes, yeah, I think that too. It's like, great. Well, that now every single, like every learning that we take forward is all broken, right?
Yeah.
The data is bad. There's anecdotal learnings that you might pull. And, you know, I've got clients right now that will spend money on focus groups like in the next 3 months that will do that, right?
Yeah.
There's something to be said for doing it, especially if you're spending millions of dollars a year, then do everything.
Yeah,
because there's no risk. Like really, you might be burning a bit of cash, but there's no inherent risk in doing that. If you're a small business, there's a big risk. So I guess that's where that's important. But if you're a small business, then you should be in that test and learn cycle. You shouldn't be in like splashing big money in big campaigns because we don't expect that to work. And that's a challenge, but one that's I think like a very real one.
Yeah. And would it be fair to say that you're a fan of digital and social, the testing happening in that environment? If you are going to do a traditional campaign, billboards and bus stops and blah, 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 are you saying that should feed the creative that does well in that campaign should feed the creative you'd use on the bus or on the billboard?
It's worked for us before.
Yeah. Cool.
I don't know if that's a great strategy, to be honest. Like it's not something that I've done a lot of. But we have used social a lot to derive insight outside of like we made a sale, right? So it's like if a typical social campaign is, objective is to, I think I'm trying to give an example, like to drive sales, to drive leads, to drive engagement, to whatever it is. Like we want to acquire new Facebook page likes, right? If that's the objective of the campaign, then that's very simple, right? It's like, okay, we know what we're trying to accomplish. If the objective is we want to learn, still simple, but you would run that campaign in a very different way.
Yeah.
And I guess that's probably the biggest point there is, to me, it makes sense to do that, right? To go and spend $100, $1,000, $10,000 up front in learning, just so that your hypothesis has a bit of data backing it, rather than going live with a bunch of stuff and like not looking at the data and just running the campaign, or worse, going live with one great message because the creative director said it was a great message. Yeah. Because it's like...
Because they like it.
And you know what? Maybe that person is smart, and maybe that person's done stuff in your industry before. And like, all of the reasons why you would engage that person or that big agency or whoever, it's like all those factors might be true and they might be really smart. I just think, why not apply an added layer of data behind that decision rather than just doing that one thing? Yeah. Like it's easy to say. It's like, but for me, it's the way that makes the most sense.
I'm so sold. Don't worry about that.
Cool.
I know you got a couple of other stories for us, but before we go on, I notice you say hypothesis a lot.
I do, yeah.
You don't have a science background, do you?
No.
It's and I do. I have a science background.
Right.
I love but I've noticed, and I'm all for the way that you're talking about all this, but it's funny that you're the one who's using those sort of sciencey terms. Yeah. Why those terms?
If everything that you do has a there's never been a campaign that we've run where we're not trying to pull data as a result, and that data might be how many people clicked, how many people bought, how many people whatever. If you're trying to derive that as the end return, then I think you have to start with a hypothesis, or at least with a theory, right? It's like, I think that this will work, or I believe that if A is true, then B will be the effect. Yep. And it's very difficult to do that if you just go live with a campaign without really thinking about why you're doing it. Example of that is like we talk about running a good test a lot, or running a good experiment a lot. Yep. So it'll be things like don't go and get 4 ads live where the visual and the copy are different across each. It's like that. Each one might make sense on their own, but I don't know whether it was the visual that worked or the copy that worked. And it's like, to me, that's taking almost a science. And like, I know nothing about science. Nothing. I know high school basic science, but I know enough about it that like, if you're going to run any experiment, then start with that. Right? Start with, what are we trying to accomplish, or what like if this works, what will I learn? And then like, that's your theory, your hypothesis. And then like, as a result of that, okay, now we've captured data. what does that data tell us? Yep. And if you use that data and feed back into hypothesis, then you stay in that cycle. And to me, that's what makes the most sense, because you get that much more accurate over time. It works.
Yep.
Like I say, I've got no science background at all, but I think like we're making analytical decisions, not emotional decisions.
Yeah.
It's not, this is, there is we've got a much bigger creative team than we do a technical team in the company.
Yep.
But a big focus for us has been like our designer has to understand the notion of data. Our designer has to, when they create something, has to basically debate with the team like what we're testing with that bit of creative and why.
Right.
It's not just, hey, go and grab a photo of Unsplash and put some text over it.
Yeah.
Right. Like that. You could do it.
Yep.
We don't really learn.
Yeah.
But if the designer and the copywriter are saying we want this result from this piece of creative, then you end up with a different outcome.
And this is how we're going to test, and this is how we're going to know we got it. Yeah, because it's so interesting. You're basically explaining a good scientific experiment where you're isolating just the single variable where this is what caused X, it's not this, everything else is the same.
It's, and even down to like different markets, right? So it's like there's things that we learn about in this market this happened, but in another market a different thing happened. Now if I go into Facebook and I get a campaign live and I go I'm targeting Brisbane and Sydney, like by default Facebook will just show the ad to the market that it believes will perform to best, and it won't weight it evenly. So even then, now you're going, okay, how does the platform work? Because now I can't just run one campaign and target all countries or all age groups, because then I can't split out the result.
Yeah.
So it's funny. We've a big focus has been, and this is something that this you talk about pushing through challenges. This is one that I didn't expect, was like, how do you build a creative team that respect data? So we hired an amazing copywriter last year, and she's with us now, and she's awesome. I absolutely love working with her.
Yep.
She came in with a very much traditional copywriting background, understood her art to the nth degree, is incredibly talented. Her biggest growth has been in like I think that one's the best. It's like, okay, cool. Now create 5 more, because I know that I agree with you. I believe that one is the best.
Yeah.
But how would we know if we didn't test? And seeing someone like her take this full, not a complete cycle, but to the point now where she's asking the question, like, okay, I think this one will derive this impact. I don't know what this one will derive, but I want to test it as well.
Right.
Which is super interesting. Like creative and data often don't play nicely.
Yeah.
So that's become my hiring strategy is trying to identify, and you don't really know, but trying to identify, will this person operate well when the data tells them they're wrong?
Okay.
Because, if you're too much of an artist, if you're too much of a creative, it's like, and I tell you that it's wrong, like, you can basically say, like, fuck you, Matt. Sorry, I don't know if I'm supposed to swear, but you give it
go for it. Now I can. So
okay, great, cool. So you might go like the creative could go, no, I'm the designer, you're not.
Yeah.
This is right for the following reasons. Like, for us to then turn around and go, okay, like fair call. Now let's see what happens next.
Yeah.
It's like respecting the data and the learnings is way more effective than respecting the client's opinion or my opinion.
Yeah.
And that's been something that's been really interesting to embark on, because I'd never hired creatives before this.
Yeah.
So interesting challenge.
Wow. So that's your hiring strategy, is it? You're looking, would that be fair to say that that's one of the main things you look for when you want to work with people, is can they separate themselves from the outcome almost? Like, this is what I'm trying. If it doesn't work, that doesn't mean I'm a piece of shit. It just means
it doesn't mean
we just learned something.
It doesn't mean you're a bad designer, right? It doesn't mean that you're bad. It means that, like, we just learned something that you wouldn't have learned in another job.
Yeah.
Which means that I actually believe, like, adding a sort of quantifiable element to it. It's not like, wow, you can design 5 things faster than anyone else. It's like, which is probably a previous KPI, right? It's like, one piece of micro content takes me 1 hour, so I am ticking all the boxes. It's like, in this case, it's like, we're learning every step of the funnel. So your creative converts more people to be customers over time, which is, I don't measure their success based on that necessarily, because it's on a case-by-case basis on each campaign or each client. But it's something that when you see that success over time, then I think everyone elevates their game anyway.
Right.
Like, no one wants to create the piece of creative that performs the worst.
Yeah.
So everyone's asking better questions.
Yeah. And it's not like you're going to have the culture where working in a company like that, or yours, that people are going to be saying, well, that sucked,
Oh, mate, not a chance.
Have-
Because I'll tell everyone they're wrong, right?
Yeah.
Like there's no opinion is right.
Yeah.
No opinion is ever right.
Yeah.
We work in business. There's ego, right? Everyone thinks they know.
Yeah.
No one really knows.
Yeah.
And I love telling clients that. It's like, no, I get what you're saying. I hear the brief. I hear what happened in past campaigns. I'm hearing all of it. I can promise you that what you're saying is probably wrong because you're saying one thing and we're going to test 20 things.
Yeah.
And you might be close, but more often than not, we're all wrong. And something that we didn't expect to perform actually performs.
Yep.
So if you went live with one piece of creative, how would you ever know?
Yeah.
It's interesting.
It's incredible. I'm loving this conversation, Matt.
Cool.
Tell us about. I understand you hired a big creative director. Can you and that had an interesting ending, I believe. Can you tell us about that?
It did. We went through a scenario. It was second half of last year where we heard word that a creative director from probably the most well-known social agency in the world was returning to Australia to live. Right. And she'd worked for, if you had to name the one biggest magazine in the world, you would say this company name.
Right.
If you had to name the biggest social agency in the world, you would say this name. It's like she was based in New York, had the most ridiculous experience over a number of years, was returning to Brisbane, and just by chance, I think just because we were sort of just hitting our stride at the time, we became an appealing place for her to come and join to really drive change, right? Yep. She'd come from the best as a creative director, and it was like, well, where do I go now? And we had this amazing situation where, equity was committed to, we're really digging into the pockets to find a way to make it work.
Oh, really?
And
okay.
And actually looking at extra investment to bring her in to that degree, because I'm going like, wow, this is someone who not only understands agency, but understands social.
Yeah.
To me, that was unheard of. Okay. Especially in Australia, anywhere in Australia.
Yep.
Let alone the world. So, but just through a sequence of really interesting events, joined us in late last year, and I guess the learning there for me was experience is important, but attitude is more important. And don't get me wrong, she's got a great attitude, but to me, the best in the world are not necessarily using data in the way that I use data.
Oh, right. Okay.
Particularly when they're led from the creative perspective. So this was a learning where this person came in. I gave her a huge, at this time the business was still very much my baby, right? I was incredibly involved, doing the long hours, doing all that. Like, okay, I full trust, full respect. I love what you've done. I wish I had your experience. Like, come in and do what you want to do. And so she actually hired a few people into the company, and they've all performed well. And that was a great experience. But what I learned was like almost. When you see a not just a lack of understanding, but a disrespect for the numbers, you go, right, this has been led from the agencies that you've experienced life in having roots into traditional marketing. So, still reporting on number of impressions, still reporting on, this is the best piece of creative because this is what we believe is the best piece of creative. And after a couple of months, I went, wow, if this is the best, then I'm super excited about the direction we're going in. And I don't believe that we're the best by any means, but one of those moments where you go, I'm going to let someone go who's got 10 times more experience than me in the biggest companies in the world. All signs point to them being a god in my world, and I'm going to let them go. Yeah. And this could be a bad idea. In fact, it's almost guaranteed to be a bad idea. And you get to a point where you go, like, okay, what's the impact of the people that she brought in? Because they're good, and I rate them. What's the impact for them, and how does that play out? At this point, I'd never let anyone go. I'd let one person go in the role in America, and no one else. And this was something where I had to go, like, I think this is what has to happen. Yep. So at the end of that 3 months, it was like, okay, like, I'm sorry, but like it's not going to work because no matter how many conversations we have about this, it's not translating. And maybe I'm too data focused, maybe I'm too numbers focused, but it's what's working for us, and our clients are getting like the results that they want because of that. And for me, that was worth more than like, if we say this, the client will buy it. It's like the client will buy it anyway, especially if we can commit to getting them a result. And if we sell that, we probably won't commit to getting them a result. And I'd rather not win the work than win it and then lose it. So that was a hard decision to make. It was a very difficult decision to make, but one that I look at the business now and I'm like, we've onboarded some incredible brands in the last few months.
Yep.
In fact, in the last 6 months, it's been the biggest that we've ever had. And I don't think we would have done that if we'd continued on that creative traditional approach rather than taking that data-driven approach. Because the beauty of the data-driven approach is that when something works, client puts more money behind it.
Yeah, yep.
The nice message, the nice piece of creative,
Yeah.
it's like, great, like, well, if we don't know what the result was, why would we invest more? Our work's only just starting for most of these guys, not finishing.
Right.
So it's different. It's different. But that was a very difficult learning curve.
Yeah, and how do you go with letting people go? How do you go with those conversations? Is that something that's tough for you, or?
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course. Especially when that person's not expecting it.
Yeah.
And when, or worse, when they want to be there.
Okay.
It's never a nice thing to do, but I think you've just got to be open, honest, real. And also, it shouldn't be a big shock for them. Okay. So if it's a surprise, then you as a manager, as a boss, as a CEO, as a whatever, probably haven't effectively communicated with them up until that point. So for me, this particular sort of scenario wasn't that difficult because, like, she knew that we weren't aligned.
Right.
And as much as we'd had conversations that were suggesting that that the bridge was being or the gap was being bridged, we never got there.
Yep.
And as much as it was difficult, it's always difficult, but it's just, if it's what you have to do, it's what you have to do.
Yeah.
And everyone always knows. Like, when you've got to make that call. Most people don't make it and they just let it go.
Yeah.
But I think that's worse for everyone. So it's not fun, but you have to do it.
And I suppose we're talking about testing a lot. I mean, I suppose to an extent you almost have to do it with the people you work with. Like, I mean, how do you really know what someone's like to work with before you work with them? It's really tough, right?
And like, we do things like creative tests, and we do like, here's some data. What bit of creative would you do next before hiring someone? So like, we're probably not a hire fast organization.
Yep.
Partly because we only have 10 staff, right? We're still very small, really. Proud of our growth, but we're not a big organization. So for every seat there, we've got to be very careful about who's sitting in it and are they the right person for where we're at today and where we're going. And I'm proud to say in most cases that person is right. Cool. We've got a few players in the team right now who are I wouldn't want anyone else. There's not a chance in the world I would want anyone else. They get it. They're great. They bring so much to the organisation culturally and from their work perspective. And we've got an amazing team.
Yeah.
That's something that in most cases you've got to just go, I think they get it, or I think they understand. And they're not just telling me they get it and they're telling me they're understanding. They, the way they operate appears to work that way. I don't expect, if I'm interviewing a new designer, I don't expect that person to like understand the impacts of, like this piece of data over that piece of data.
Right.
I wouldn't hire for that purpose. I would hire someone who can shift from very corporate design to digital design to web to print, right? If they're versatile, then the rest will come. If they understand the notion of like no 2 days are the same, then they'll probably get the idea that data plays a role. And if they understand that, then it will work.
Right.
It's something that I guess that's a challenge. I've never been super aware of that. I've always said, like, I would hire anyone, really. Like, I would, like, outside of having creative experience, so copywriting, design, video, they're pretty specific skill sets. So if I need that, we'll hire someone with that skill set. But for my next BD person, that would be like, I think you can talk, or I think you understand it, or you can tell the story. If you can tell the story, like, I can't sell, but if I tell the story, people buy. So if that's working, I'm just going to keep doing it, and that's now my selling strategy. It may not be conventional, but it works.
Right.
And I think if the person talked to a storyteller and they're able to capture your attention, they'll probably be a great BD person. Even if that means having to knock down doors to get meetings, they'll find a way. And so, I would hire a stand-up comedian, or I'd hire a mathematician or a scientist, right?
Wow.
It's like, to me, it doesn't really matter what you are. It's like, what's your attitude is way more important.
Yeah. Super interesting.
That's something that it's not, you don't really, it's not documented, right?
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
no like, in 3 months we're getting an account manager, and then in 4 months we're getting another ads manager, and then in 5, it's like none of that really, like, that's not the plan. The plan is what do we need?
Yep.
And what we need right now is what we've got. So, there's times where we're incredibly busy, and then there's time, like, we typically work to a monthly schedule with most of our clients. So while there's ongoing iteration, we do sort of big monthly reporting and then intermittent reports, often every 48 hours, depending on the campaigns we're running. Like, with that in mind, then it's like, okay, there's going to be lulls. There's going to be times where a huge campaign goes live, and you know that you've got 2 days where I'm not going to ask you to do anything, and that's okay. But know that at the end of the week, it's going to get really freaking busy.
Yeah.
Because we're going to have to make a few changes.
Yep.
And that's something that if people can do that and can adjust to that instability, then it'll work.
And you don't care about degrees or...
It's interesting. For me, it's like, I don't think I learned anything from my business degree. I mean, you probably get a bit of confidence, a bit of public speaking experience from doing those big group assignments and all that stuff. So I guess that plays a part. For me, the one thing that my business degree gave me that I would do it again tomorrow for was the ability to get a visa to work overseas.
All right.
Without that, I could not have gone to America. In fact, when the Monkey Inferno was going to sponsor my visa, they went through the lawyers, and the lawyers came back and said, you will not get the E3 visa because your business degree in Australia is 3 years and in America it's 4 years.
Okay.
And we cannot argue equivalency.
Right.
And what ended up happening was we ended up getting a second lawyer, and I had to push this pretty hard. The company actually gone, I don't think it's the lawyers are saying we can't, and I actually pushed pretty hard to get a second opinion.
Yeah.
And what we were able to debate was, and it got to this degree, it was like, okay, the first year of a business degree in the USA is far more basic and broad than what it's more closely aligned to year 12 in Australia.
Right.
So with that in mind, we were able to debate it, and it got through.
Wow.
If I didn't have that, if I didn't have the 3-year degree, there was not a chance in the world I would have gotten that visa. Unless I was a celebrity of some type, it wouldn't have worked.
Okay.
And we'd used the fact that my book was an Amazon bestseller and the podcast was the number 1 in iTunes. We'd used all of that to try and get through, and almost got unstuck from the degree only being 3 years, which I couldn't do anything about. But having it was worth it for that. So for me, I will always tell people, go and do it, but not because you expect to learn. You will learn something, you always do, but do it because the result that you want will come from somewhere that you didn't expect. I've met a couple of people in my degree that I'm still friends with today. Would my life be different if I hadn't met them? Maybe, maybe not. But there's always an outcome that you don't expect from everything that you do. So, or if you've got to capitalize. But for me, that was the output.
Very interesting. Well, I think I mean, I didn't like my education, my tertiary education, but I look back on it as at least I did it, so I can whinge about it.
And now you're one of the people.
I've got the credibility to say it sucks.
The broken education system. I don't think I learned much. A lot of my degree, I was working in a very, very junior role, sort of part-time hours when in corporate, but junior through most of my degree. And throughout the blessing of uni was that I was able to see what was real and what it's like, okay, this thing we're doing right now is very hypothetical and probably would never happen in the real world. And I know that because I'm doing something kind of in the real world, and I can see that that's not how a manager would make that decision, or that's not how you would do the creative, or that's not how whatever. So to me, that was a very, very it was very useful having that a little bit of real world, very limited, but a little bit of real world experience while studying. Without that, it would have been, I just wouldn't have gotten any real value.
I mean, because there's no context then, right? Like, so you learn this, you read about something in a book, and then you go and apply it. And you've made up this scenario in your head about how it's going to go, right? Because this is what the book told me. And then this other thing happens that you weren't expecting.
And you're like, that wasn't in the book.
You go back to the book and it's not there. That's what I always prefer, the practical approach is I like to do something and then go back to the theory. So do something, do an absolute rubbish job of it, and then go back to it, so long as there's not consequences. And
For sure.
And then
That's
go
all
back
right.
to the theory of, because then you got context. So when I did that, I should have done this instead, right? You can learn that way.
It's like, I missed the develop hypothesis phase and I just went straight to the campaign. No wonder I don't know what the outcome was, right? I didn't know what I was testing for. And I think that's, I look at at most of the university experience, and I remember sitting there because 17, 18, 19-year-olds sitting in uni lectures, it's like always like sort of just groaning when the mature age student who was in his 30s raised his hand to ask a question or to tell a story about his life, and we'd all sit there and go like, oh, again, like shut up. Like basically, it's like the sooner we finish, the sooner we go home. Yeah, and I remember like that happening all the time, and it's like, actually, they probably got way more out of their degree than I ever did because not because they're asking questions. I think in most cases you don't need to do that, but they had some map of the world that they were able to apply that thinking to, which was probably valuable. Yep. For us, it was like, yep, that's Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Yep, that's a SWOT analysis. Like, great, okay.
I'm hungover.
Yeah. It's like, great. Okay, SWOT, cool. I'll remember that in the grid, and in the exam I'll draw it. Like, great, awesome. Like, not that useful, but I'll do it. And without anything to apply it to, it's like, how could you do that? So it's interesting. And the other thing I found was even, studying marketing, it's like a huge component of that is creative. So it's like no one could tell you were wrong when you were doing here's a big campaign idea and it's going to reach the millennial market. It's going to do a TV campaign and blah, 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 blah. It's like you'd get a tick or you'd get a grade because the manager went, yes, you talked about the target market, you talked about the channel, you talked about the product. It's like you get a tick. Yep. It's like, okay, but like at no point did we talk about whether that would be useful. Like because no one knows. So I think that's where the market's wrong, right? Or that's where at least the university model was wrong. I don't know how far it's come. My fear is that it probably hasn't come that far. But I don't know. I believe in the notion of test and learn now. Big time.
Love it. All right, so let's talk about, I know you've had some challenges too with re-educating the market. Tell us about that.
That's interesting. We find that, like in most cases, I'll walk into a meeting with someone. I think it almost goes back to that notion of like telling someone that like no one really knows, right? It's like if you're a middle manager at a big organization and your role is to write a brief, go to an agency, they come back and pitch, you get your CEO to sign off on it and you run the campaign. It's like, in most cases, you're used to them coming back with an idea and you're going, oh, it's not really us, this would be more us, and the agency goes and tweaks it a little bit and comes back. It's like, if that's the way you've always done it, then talking about data, like that's such a foreign concept up front. To talk about like, here's what we actually want to accomplish. Like, often you'll set KPIs. Those KPIs are like, all right, we want to have market saturation of this much, or we want to have this much recall from this particular target segment. It's like, how are you going to measure that anyway? Even if you had built a project specifically to measure that, you wouldn't be able to. So a huge part of my time now is, and like I say, blessing is that if business comes from referral, people are usually asking for an opinion or they're asking for feedback. They're not sitting there, being all cynical, sort of waiting for you to convince them why you should work together. So the biggest thing for me has been like helping people to understand not that this is the only way, that this is another way or a different way. And when you have that conversation, everyone buys. Everyone always buys.
Right.
But because they go, well, that makes sense, right? It makes sense to test a few things and then capitalize on what works. I had a scenario where a good friend of mine who works for an engineering company, he was introducing me to a friend of his who was a prospective client, and they sort of came into this meeting. And halfway through the discussion, he goes, my mate, who knows me, knows what we do, goes, oh, I wish we'd had this conversation 6 months ago. We just did a cinema campaign. And I'm I get it. I get how that market works. But it's an engineering company. It doesn't make sense for that. It's like a wrong channel. Whoever sold it to you was wrong. Like that, to me, that makes sense that was not a good idea. But for him, it's like, I don't know, like the people go to the cinema, like I might as well put my thing up there. Like it's like no one's going to remember your logo from that. No one cares. And in fact, no one cares anyway. You're a totally wrong channel. Like you can't get someone to care about your product if they need it, let alone when they go to watch like a movie. So to me, like if you can articulate the way that you operate, and that's more interesting than the way someone operates right now, then it's very easy to re-educate.
Right.
If you go in there and say the way you're doing it is wrong, the way I do it is right, then you're probably not going to, because it doesn't work, right? Like, oh, I would do it this way, or here's the list of questions that that I would be like, we had a scenario where very recently a prospective client was coming in and he came in and said, a mate of mine wanted me to ask you these questions just to basically to test us. And it was all like, so how many times a day should I post on Facebook? Literally those sorts of questions. And I'm sitting there like pulling my hair out. I'm like, mate, if that's your focus, like, and I know that it wasn't because it was just a friend who was trying to help, but like if they're the things that you're focusing on, then this is never going to work because it's the wrong priority, wrong effort, wrong idea, wrong everything. It's like your focus needs to be on learning what your market cares about. When you know that, you'll win. When you don't know that, you'll lose.
Right.
And right now you don't know that. Or you know it to a degree, but nowhere near enough that you'd be comfortable. If you would be comfortable going and remortgaging the house and putting $500,000 behind a campaign, then you don't know. So to me, that's a fairly simple equation to make. And it just requires education. But I guess that's the beauty of this space is the lean startup was already made, right? It was already designed. It was Eric Ries and a bunch of other smart people like Steve Plank had already gone, this is how you do this in the startup world. So for me, it was take that, tweak it to work. You have to tweak it a bit. The channels are different. The message is different. The product is different. All that stuff changes. But as long as I've got that and then I've got case studies or what sort of this is how we've performed in the past, then it's very easy to re-educate.
Right. And you go in, like you said before, you're not a salesman, and I can just talking to you, you're a very honest person. I mean, are we going to see more of that, do you think, over the next few years where people are going to look for that honesty when they're buying as opposed to, I mean, the stereotypical salesman just, goes in there full of energy and, this is so great. This is what we do. Here's all the benefits. Don't mention any risks or, and it sounds like you are the type of person who would talk about that as well.
Yes.
How important do you think that's going to become in the business world?
I mean, it's arguably, if relationships are everything, even if you look at traditional sort of B2B sales, right? It was like relationships have always been important. And typically you don't buy someone you don't trust. Unless they've done an amazing job at selling you on fear and everything else. It's like, then it's very hard to win that way. For me, I don't think there is another way. It's like, sure, you can go in there and hard sell, but it's just not like, I don't get that because I can't do it. And I don't like it when I'm hard sold.
Yeah.
I had a scenario very recently where a potential supplier was sort of had a BDM really aggressively selling to me, and I ended up going to his boss who I knew, and I said, like, okay, I appreciate what you guys are trying to do, but honestly, if you answer these couple of questions, which I've now asked 3 times, I'll just say yes. Like, if I just need to know if this will work, and if they will, then we can do it. If you can't do those 3 things, then we won't. Like, selling me on like what my competitors are doing, or like doesn't matter. Doesn't help me. Doesn't affect me. Like, we're on our own path. Like, I just need to know if what you're offering, if this is what you're offering. If it is, I'll pay for it. And we ended up buying because I was able to get the answers to those questions.
Right.
It's for me, it's more about like, if I would rather not lose a client than lose a client. So, and I would rather have good conversations than bad conversations. If we win work we can't deliver on, then we're going to lose the client. So it's like, that's already an awkward, uncomfortable, difficult situation to be in. I'm trying to like plan new hires. I'm not going to be able to do that if our cash flow is bad. And if we're losing clients left, right, and center, our cash flow is non-existent. So I guess it comes down to like, it just makes sense to do the right thing. If you do the right thing, you'll continue to do well, right? It's like, and I don't know whether like honest, like the people have been honest forever. Like I think that's fair to say. My selling strategy is just to try to do that, to try to be real and tell people when I think things will work or won't work, because then no one's shocked or surprised, or it's like you then become reliable, and then they'll come to you for advice because they trust you. And if trust is the one variable we all need to work on, then that's what's most important to me.
Right.
So I don't know. I think I buy from people who are like me, and I appreciate it when people are real and open and tell you when it does work and when it doesn't work, or when they can deliver and what they can't deliver on. More often than not, you end up working with them for the things that they can do that they're best, and scrapping the things that they're not good at, which is better for everybody. So it's for me, it's more about like, if you can build a good relationship based on trust, then you'll win.
And it matters what's going on in your client's head, right? Or potential client's head, not in your head, right? So it's just funny that they wouldn't even you're the one who's going to buy, right? And they wouldn't answer your questions. It
was just because it was hardcore sales guy.
Yeah.
Thought he knew his plan or his approach, or thought he had this pitch that it's worked before, and he was going to hit me with it. And it was like I just need these few, and it was as transparent as like on the phone and in an email, like literally like 3 questions numbered.
Yeah.
And the response is like, here are these 7 reasons why people buy, and it's all of the real reasons why, and then hitting on the fear of not getting it wrong or not buying, and I understand the sales psychology there. Like I get it.
Yeah.
But for me, if you don't solve the core need that I need you to solve, then the fear, there is no fear, there is no win. It's like the model's broken. So I just had to talk to someone who I knew, who I could go, hey, I get it, but dude, this is not working.
Yeah.
And from there, it played out well. So, yeah, I don't know. I would hate to think that we as a business were doing that in the market. We're selling something we couldn't deliver on, or were exaggerating, or were like, everything that we very, very rarely will report on metrics that we know aren't valuable, even if they sound good.
Yeah. That's easy to do.
In our space, simple, right?
Yeah.
Oh, I could put $30 behind something and then talk about how it reached 40,000 people. Yeah. It's like you can high five yourselves if you want to, but we all know it didn't serve an objective. So it might have, but in like more often than not, that 40,000 people, if your 1% click through rate tells you what the impact is.
Yeah.
And
if you're quoting that metric, then it probably didn't serve its purpose, right?
There you go.
Because why are you focusing on that?
There you go. Yeah. Yeah. And if you're quoting that, I don't know. You better hope your customer's not a bit more clued on and has access to the ads account, because they're going to go in there and see what actually happened anyway.
Yeah.
So, people get unstuck. We do audits all the time for clients who will actually come to us and ask us just to review current campaigns. And I'll be very quick to tell someone that that's interesting because of this learning. Didn't solve it. Didn't provide any objective apart from that. But you learned this.
Yeah.
So stop everything and go and do something with that knowledge. You can piss some people off, but I don't know. To me, that's the right way of doing it.
Right. Yeah. Very good. I've got a couple more questions. I ask this I want to ask you the Twitter one first. So I'm really interested to get your take on this. But do you think that Twitter will be the first death of the big social giants?
If the big social giants are Facebook, Instagram,
Pinterest,
Twitter, Pinterest, LinkedIn.
Does it have a hope?
That's hard. No. I don't think it does have a hope.
Well, okay.
It's brutal, right? I'm not in the business of predicting this stuff. I don't know.
Okay.
I'll put it a different way. Yep. I'm not spending any money on Twitter right now for any of my clients.
Right.
Yep. If I am spending...
I don't know anyone who is.
Well, there you go, right? I've done it before for myself. And we've run campaigns on Twitter previously. It would be incorrect for me to say that. We have done it in the past. But we've always done it for international markets, not for the domestic market.
Yep.
So I think it's probably losing relevance in Australia. It's great for if you are in B2B sales and your customer is someone in sales or marketing, it's great. Yep. Because every marketer is on it, every salesperson is on it. It's great for that, right? In the same way that LinkedIn is great for that, right? Because the person that your customer, the person you're targeting, is also targeting other people on that channel. So it's quite easy to then reach them.
But that doesn't make Twitter money, though.
It doesn't make Twitter money, but does make it useful for a percentage of the market. Yeah. The problem is when the market when the population disappears from it, then that is a null and void, right? It doesn't matter. I don't think Twitter has a bright future. I like it. I'm more of a consumer. I consume content rather than create on Twitter. Used to do a lot. Don't so much anymore. With probably again reflective of where I spend my time, which is probably reflective of what I think of the channel. To be honest, I would hate to see it die.
Same.
It's not. It's been a pretty big gateway for me to interact with people that I would never been able to interact with any other way. So I've loved Twitter and learned a lot from it. Whether or not. I mean, listen, I wouldn't bet against Facebook at this point.
No.
I wouldn't bet against Instagram as a result of Facebook at this point.
Yep.
LinkedIn, now Microsoft, I don't know what that means.
Yep.
In fact, maybe there's more risk there of something happening than with Twitter, right?
Right,
I don't know, do I believe Microsoft can own LinkedIn? I don't know. I don't know what they do there. It's there's things like that it's I don't know.
Okay.
I don't know. But I'm spending the bulk of our budgets on Facebook and Instagram right now. So.
Yeah. I mean, I think that Twitter has maybe it's just my feed, my echo chamber, but it's so much automated stuff going through there now. That's this is just not real anymore, guys.
Well, I don't think, if you're following more than a couple hundred people, you can't sit there and just scroll through that main feed.
No.
That's not, Twitter's not useful for that anymore.
Yeah.
If you are, and I don't know who this audience is and if it is even still an audience, but if you are a teenager and all your friends are on Twitter and you're only following those people, maybe it's useful then.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe that feed is useful. Right now, the feed is dead to me. I follow thousands of people and it's a problem.
Right.
So for me, it's literally an added address book for people that I don't have on Facebook. That's probably what it is. The challenge is that most of the people for me now, with my sort of the role that I operate with day to day, is that LinkedIn's sort of taken that place.
Okay.
Before I was running the business, I always had a LinkedIn account, but I probably didn't rely on it for interacting with people like I do now.
Okay.
So from a sales perspective especially. So yeah, I don't spend the time on Twitter that I should. If I didn't have push notifications set up, I probably wouldn't have seen tweets that we were in today. Like I wouldn't have jumped in and checked. I don't check it every day.
Okay.
So going from probably spending up to an hour or two on it a day in the past to probably nothing now.
Wow. Yeah, it says a lot.
It does, yeah. It's like whether or not it's getting to die, I don't know. Like I'll tell you what, if it starts to perform, I'll be straight back.
Yeah, yep.
But I just don't know. It's probably a good place to spend money on, to be honest. If you think about like the competitive factor, right? Like on Facebook, it's like price is dictated by demand, right? There's limited supply of space, which drives cost up.
Yep.
On Twitter, if there's less competition, then that by default means that you're probably going to get a more cost-effective campaign. So like if your market segment is there, maybe it makes sense.
Yeah, okay.
As a user, I'm not so interested.
Yeah, cool point. Yeah. All right. So I ask this every time. It's the one question I ask every podcast. What's your relationship like with self-doubt?
Yeah, I thought about this. I talk about the notion, like I think I mentioned imposter syndrome, right? It's like I'm quite good at backing myself.
Okay.
That's come through learning that I need to. And it's like saying it on a podcast is dumb because it's like everyone hears it, but whatever. There you go. There's some self-doubt. So if someone on the team comes to me and asks me a question, I feel a need to have an answer.
Right.
And that answer might be backed by experience. It might be gut feel. And I'm usually pretty transparent about, I don't know, but this is what I think because of these reasons. But I don't want to appear like I have no idea. Sometimes I'll say I have no idea. Sometimes I'll say, what do you think? Because I don't know. And they'll tell me and then we'll brainstorm and maybe you get to a solution. I think like if we knew all the answers, I'd be a lot more successful than I was.
Right.
So
okay.
I'm very clear about the fact that like we've all got a lot to learn. If there wasn't some degree of self-doubt, then I think like there would be no reason for me to not knock down the door of every CMO in the country and have an agency that has 10,000 staff working for it right now.
Right.
Like the reason why I haven't done that is because I don't think that I could.
Right.
And that's obviously a challenge. But
surely there's got to be some self-awareness there that maybe you couldn't. Like maybe no one could do that. Like
maybe
that's not. Doesn't sound easy.
No, for sure. But it's like, I guess like there's tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of people in the world who've started a business and in 3 years have got hundreds of staff or thousands of staff, right? That's happened, right? I haven't done that. Okay. I think I'm pretty good in most cases. And most things that I do, I think I'm pretty good, which there's a lot of arrogance in that, which I wish there wasn't, but it sounds like there is. Like the fact that I haven't done that, I haven't gone as big as I would love to. There's a bit of that like, well, maybe I can't, or why haven't I? And there's been strategic moves, and there's been moves that I'm like, man, if I just played that card right, like we would be in a very different place right now. But you can't know that all the time.
Yeah.
Right? It's like Gary Vaynerchuk talks about all the time the story behind like, he had multiple opportunities to invest in Uber.
Yeah.
And his $20,000 would be $300 million right now if he'd done it. And he said no multiple times.
Yeah.
And at the time he was investing hundreds of thousands of dollars into random companies. So he could have easily done it.
Yeah.
And he chose not to. And that would have been the game changer for him. Like, for me, it's like there's a lot of things that in hindsight, it's like, like if we'd pitched it this way, we would have won it.
Right, yeah.
And I think every time you have that, it opens up opportunity for doubt, but it also opens up opportunity for learning.
Yeah.
So it's like, I don't want to have the experience where we lost again, but I guess what's even more important to me is that if we lost, why did we lose? Because then there's less self-doubt in the future if you understand what changed it or what what the factor was that enabled you to move forward. it's a very roundabout way of saying I don't really know. Like, I don't know. There's things that I'm super confident in, and there's things that I'd say like, okay, don't know. Like, let's take a guess, and we just have to run at it. The one thing I'm not a fan of is being inefficient or inaction. Like I don't respect inaction. So if a decision has to be made, it's like, what information do I require to make that decision? Can I easily get that information or not? If I can easily get it, then get the information and make the decision. If I can't easily get the information, then make the decision anyway. And we might, I might lose something, I might offend someone, something might go wrong. It's like, that's okay. It was like, I made the best decision that I could with the information that I had.
Yeah. And you acted, right?
And through acting, you learn and all that great stuff that happens. So I guess that's important to me. That's very important to me, is the notion of, like, I don't know what the best thing is to do. I think this is the best. Right. And if I believe that we always knew, then the notion of iterative marketing is broken. Because if we always knew, then we wouldn't do it with this test, measure, learn. Yeah. We would just think about what our big idea was and run the campaign, which sends us back to the 70s. So, I don't know. Interesting.
Yeah. So, I mean, actually, from that, I'm now interested in whether you talked about when something doesn't go right and, that sucks. I'm one of those people that dwells way too much on that. When something goes wrong and I beat myself up for way too long, I'm trying to work on it, but I'm one of those people. So how do you... Are you one of those people, or can you move on pretty quickly?
There are things in my life where I've done something dumb, silly, embarrassing, and as a 10-year-old, and I still wake up in the middle of the night thinking about that now.
Wow.
Not a lot, but there's little things, right?
I've got stuff like that too, yeah.
Like just dumb things. I remember, I'll tell a story. No one's heard this story before. Okay. No, I've never told a story, and it's not too crazy, but I remember one night, I was definitely in primary school, probably early primary school, in Cleveland, where I grew up, and my dad and I were in the car, drove to pick up pizzas from Domino's or something. We've gone inside. I've been waiting inside. Dad's come out, got in the car, and I've been waiting inside to pick up the pizzas, right? So it's like I can see the car from outside. I pick up the pizzas. It's nighttime. Walk outside, walk to the car, open the back door, get in the car, order the pizzas, look up, and it's like the wrong car. So literally I'm sitting in the back seat of a car that is someone that I've never met. I'm like, oh my God, I'm sorry. And I literally got out of the car, ran back to my dad. My dad, I think he saw it. He's never mentioned it. He didn't say anything at the time. Yeah. The cars were dark. I don't know what I was paying attention to. I have no idea. Yeah. But I still think about the awkwardness that I felt in that situation. Wow. And I hate it. And I don't know why I'm telling that story. That's weird. But
no, I totally get it.
That's one of those things where it's like, I remember that. I remember saying dumb things and then everyone laughing. Like at school, little things that everybody does. And I think about that occasionally. In business, it doesn't affect me as much. And I think part of that is because it's less personal. I mean, it's very personal in many cases, but if I lose a contract because I was too honest, it's like, part of me goes, fuck you for being a retard, right? Yep. Well, sorry, that's horrible language. I shouldn't have said that. But
it's all right. Be yourself.
Part of me goes like...
I've already got to put E on iTunes anyway.
Great. Oh, but, dude, that's a hack. That works. That actually helped us acquire podcast viewers. Okay. We made every episode explicit.
Oh, yeah. Well, most of mine is swearing, so
great.
Maybe I'll benefit from that too.
Yeah, for sure. I'm still the case.
From this one, definitely. Yeah.
Great. What was I saying? I think in business it's different. It's like I get less concerned about it. There's things that I regret and that I think about a lot. So there's things about I should have never pitched that. Or in the early days, it was like, man, that thing that we did was dumb and that was embarrassing. Mm-hmm. There is not a person we've worked with that I don't think would refer us to someone else. So the experience in most cases is positive, or in many cases is overwhelmingly positive. And I want to talk about this. I'm thinking about probably 4 or 5 clients in the 3 years. Mm-hmm. And they're all clients that, like I say, would refer us again. They appreciate the experience, they got learnings, but I look at it and I'm like, man, if I only knew what I knew now. It's like, but if I knew what I knew now, everything would have been different. Yeah. And I might not be here now. It might be totally different. So I think I've come to terms with the fact that not everything is going to work, and there's going to be things that I do today that I'm going to look back on and cringe in 5 years' time. I hope. Yep. I hope. Like today, we sent a pretty serious pitch email that we pitched in a way that we pitched incentive only. So only pay us per conversion that we generate. I've never done that before for a client. Wow. So no retainer. We fund the ad spend ourselves. Right. Taking a huge gamble. Yep. The upside on that, if we succeed, is massive, and that's why we're doing it this way. Yep. but it's a giant risk for us. But I've got enough money now in the bank that I can go, I'm willing to take this risk.
Yep.
If it works, it's better for the client. They're only paying on success and we're more accountable. And which I believe we're accountable anyway, but this is step forward, right? Now it's me putting my money on the line and me investing in the team. And that's super scary.
Yep.
I hope I don't look back at this and go, man, I just burnt 100K like it was nothing.
Right.
I hope I don't do that. I don't think I will. I've got a really good feeling about it. But this is one of those times where it's like, could go either way.
Yeah.
And I guess all you can do is go, best decision I can make right now is that.
Yeah.
Just do it. And I'm going to stay awake at night in 2 years' time and regret it, but that's okay.
Right.
Because if it works, then we made a lot more than that. So it's worth it.
Cool.
Interesting.
That's incredible. Yeah. I can't believe you mentioned all the stuff with just the random stories from back in the day that you can still remember. I mean, mine was, I've got one where I was on a reality show, so I can't I can't get rid of that.
Tell that story.
Well, I was on it's a bad story, but I was on a reality show, and I mean, part of it was I had to do one of the challenges where I had to do I had to get up on stage and do a bodybuilding competition, right? Which is not something that I'd ever do in any situation ever, unless I had to, because I had to in this situation. So I'm up on there in my budgie smugglers, and I've never, I don't wear and I'm just up there, and I just look back on that and cringe, and I just can't. I don't know. It's hard, and I mean it's recorded, so good luck ever living that down. Hey, but
that's interesting. That's interesting. And that's in a situation where really there's nothing you I mean, I guess you could say I'm not doing it and leave, but really you're stuck, right? It's
a high pressure environment.
So someone else is saying you will do this, and you know that it's not going to be good.
Yeah.
See, that's scary.
Yeah.
That's because that's making the decision to do it. I guess yeah, we all have things like that it's like, I'm doing this because I feel like I have to do it. That's a pretty intimidating scenario. Yeah. I'm glad I've never experienced that.
No, I don't recommend it.
Wow. It's funny. TV is something that I get excited about TV and the idea of TV just because I think it's still a fascinating channel. It's fascinating to me that it exists and in the way that it exists, and it won't for a long time. But I don't think it's disappearing, but it's certainly evolving with online playing out like it is. But I think that I've always wanted to do something on TV. I don't know what. I don't think of myself as an outgoing person at all. Like I say, I'm not comfortable talking I would never talk to the person on the line next to me, but I'm okay speaking at an event.
Yeah,
so it's funny like that. But it's the high pressure thing. I can totally see why you would end up doing it, and then why you would massively regret it.
Yeah.
Brutal. And now that you've told that story, you're going to wake up in the middle of the night tonight thinking about it.
That's what I'm going to think about for the next 2 weeks. No, it's my fault. I was in the first place. Anyway, this has been incredible, Matt.
Cool.
Thanks so much for being with us. Where can we find you?
Well, let's give Twitter a shout out then. Let's do Twitter. Let's do Twitter, because then I might actually come back to the platform. At Matthew Kelly on Twitter. I had to get that pretty early to get my name, which is good. And where else? LinkedIn's probably a good one. Just search for me, Matt Kelly, or I think I might be Matthew Kelly on LinkedIn. But if you type in, you'll find me.
Cool.
I'll
link to it in the show notes. And
great.
justmediadesign.com.au is the one?
Yep, that's the site. Yeah. And I guess the biggest part of all this is the big thing for us is whether it's someone wants to just chat or learn about, I get a lot of students who hit us up for internships or jobs or whatever. If anyone's got any questions, I'm more than happy to do anything to help. I don't pretend to know all the answers, but shit, it's people have helped me in the past. So
right.
if that's one thing that I can do is, hear a story and provide some insight, then I'm more than happy to.
Awesome. All right. Thanks so much for being here, Matt.
Love it. Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Be The Push podcast. Show notes can be found at bethepush.com/podcast and clicking on the relevant episode link. I appreciate your company and look forward to talking to you again soon.